Okay, so Adam, there are a few people, members of the Transit Committee, who you could add. Christine Symington. Oh, there's, do you want me to wait and do it one at a time, or can I give you a list?
You can give me a list, it's fine.
Okay, so Christine, and then Louise Wilson and Jessica Wilson. Nat, you can't hear anything? Can everybody else hear?
Yeah.
I can hear you.
I can hear you.
Nat, you can't hear anything?
He could try calling in on his phone to get the audio.
All right. Okay, Jim Purcell, our engineer, if you can let Jim in. And Tinika is the liaison from the bike committee. Tinika Teo is in the waiting room. And Joan Lockwood Reck is a member of the committee. Sorry, everyone. We had hoped that everyone was supposed to get their own individual link, but it has not worked out exactly that way. Oh, Deanna is in the waiting room. She's. Okay. Oh, I actually am able to do this. Okay. Promote to panelist. Okay. All right. Well, while we're doing that, why don't we get started? Welcome, everybody. Tonight is a special meeting of the Princeton's Public Transit Advisory Committee, and we're really excited to be hosting New Jersey Transit. And we've invited some representatives from municipal boards, committees, and commissions. Once we get the invited guests into the meeting, we have Planning Board, Pedestrian and Bike Advisory Committee, and Environmental Commission, representatives, and then a number of local groups also have representatives. So why don't we, in the interest of time, let Nat, can you hear yet? Nope. Okay. Well, we'll let Nat was going to give a little introduction, but I will just let New Jersey Transit start. They have, I think most of you are familiar with the study that they've been doing, which involves our Dinky corridor, and they had a number of options that they were researching, and I believe tonight they're going to tell us about which options they've narrowed down the selection to and why, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity for questions. So go ahead, New Jersey Transit. Hopefully we won't have a problem with you sharing your PowerPoint.
Can you guys see the screen? It's coming through?
Yes.
Okay, great. So welcome, everyone. My name's Adam Catherine. I'm a project manager with Stantec, and we're the consultant for NJ Transit on the Princeton Transitway study. First of all, I'd like to say thanks for everybody taking time out of your day to be with us this evening. Thanks to the Transit Committee for hosting us. And let's just jump right in. So this evening, I'll be talking about the review of some of our activities to date. Where did we come from? Where are we right now? Summarize the existing conditions and needs, which are basically getting us through the initial planning process. Then we'll talk about the preliminary alternatives that were evaluated and how we evaluated those alternatives ultimately to reach our preferred alternatives. And at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions. So the transit study is really the first step in a multi-step process to get us from, the initial planning stage, which we are now, ultimately to sometime in the future implementation. So right now we're at the concept level, and really this is a planning level study to help direct the future of transit mobility on this corridor. And we have a concentrated study area, which we're calling the concept study area, which is essentially along the Dinky line between the Princeton and Princeton Junction stations. But we also recognize pretty early on in this process that this corridor itself, the Dinky line, is a very valuable resource in Princeton and West Windsor. And we recognize the need to think outside of the corridor. How can we enhance mobility both in Princeton and West Windsor in the general area by leveraging this great resource that we have, that is the Dinky line. Oops. Our four main project goals are to improve quality, frequency, and span of service. So making sure that the service is more reliable, it's frequent, and it operates at more times during the day. Enhancing connectivity. So this goes back to my previous slide, really looking at how do we enhance connections to the community between the corridor and the community, and which will ultimately help us to meet our other goals. We also are looking to incorporate new technology and emerging technology, not just on the transit and vehicle propulsion, not just on the vehicle, the transit vehicle side, but also how do we incorporate micro-mobility modes, and how do we stay flexible to accommodate future ways of getting around that we're not even contemplating at the moment. And we also want to provide flexibility and scalability. An example would be if there is an event in downtown Princeton, we want to have a system that we could potentially enhance the service of, enhance the frequency of, to meet those short-term special event type of demands. The study is really needed for several reasons right now. For the first main reason is that the current rail cars that are utilized on the Dinky line are aging. They're reaching their end of their service life. Obviously, with that comes maintenance, maintenance concerns, maintenance costs, increased maintenance, which affects reliability and service. NJ Transit's currently upgrading its rail fleet. I'm sure many of you, if you've ridden the Northeast Corridor line or other lines across New Jersey Transit System, you know the multi-level cars that are being employed right now. But there are several challenges to utilizing those rail vehicles on the Princeton branch, on the Dinky line. The Dinky line is smaller, it has smaller stations, and these three multi-level units have to run in consists of at least 3. So that does present some challenges. So we have to think about that. Ridership has been declining even before the pandemic, and we'll talk about that in the upcoming slides in a little bit more detail. There's also changing demands for transit post-pandemic, right? We have to think beyond the typical 9-to-5 commuter when we think about maximizing this resource that is the Dinky line. And there's also new demand on the corridor. West Windsor is planning a transit-oriented development adjacent to the Princeton Junction station. Princeton University is planning some growth on the east side of the canal, or south side of the canal. So there's a lot of things happening along this corridor, and the potential for other things to happen if we were to think about the operation of the corridor and how it goes into the future. So we started the study almost probably about a little over a year ago, evaluating existing conditions and constraints. So, the constraints include property, environmental, cultural resources, that sort of thing. We met with our stakeholder group at the end of that in mid-spring. We also conducted a rider survey at that time for riders that were riding pre-pandemic. Utilizing that information, we developed several concept alternatives and began a preliminary evaluation, and we met with our stakeholders again back at the end of fall of 2021. And there was another survey, hopefully many of you saw that or contributed to that, where we asked folks to look at some of the preliminary alternatives and rank them and answer a few questions about that. Taking that information, we refined our concepts, looked at operations, and now we're here We've evaluated our 3 concepts. We're ready to select our preferred alternatives and finalize this planning study. And that's why we're coming here today. And we'll be also meeting with our stakeholder group again to get the final feedback. We talk about our existing conditions, some of the key takeaways from our discussions, as well as from looking at the data. One being that, ridership has been trending down even before the pandemic. And there's a few factors that kind of combined to facilitate that. You can see here on the chart on the right that it was around 2013 when the additional parking was finished at the Princeton Junction station. But I think that was just one component of kind of a recipe. The other components were really that the Princeton station on the Princeton end is outside of walking distance for a lot of people. So a lot of commuters aren't able to walk. It's relatively far from walking wise from their homes. And so that combined with the more easier parking conditions at Princeton Junction, we saw a lot of folks choosing just to drive straight to the Princeton Junction. Those factors combine obviously with the service limitations of the Dinky. It's a single track. It runs one train back and forth with operational constraints. We're looking at 30-minute headways. Doesn't necessarily always line up the best with our departures and arrivals on the Northeast Corridor. You can see here in the bottom right image, this was a study done by DVRPC in 2018, and it was looking at where people live that were parking at Princeton Junction. And there was a significant concentration of Princeton residents that were parking at Princeton Junction for many of those reasons that I mentioned before. We obviously need service adjustments to meet new travel patterns. Goes back to my comment about thinking beyond the 9-to-5 commuter. We have overlapping transit services between NJ Transit, between Princeton University, and between Princeton itself, but there are still gaps in connectivity across the community. There's institutional growth and potential for transit-oriented development, infill along the corridor, and there's a demand for enhanced mobility, particularly those last mile and micro mobility connections. So the results of our first survey revealed reliability and frequency of the service is most important. I think that's kind of a no-brainer. Although folks did also mention the need to enhance access to downtown Princeton and other residential areas adjacent to the corridor. There was a significant interest in pedestrian and bicycle connections, and we'll talk about how that was factored in. And the other thing that we noticed in the survey was that 76% of respondents utilized the Princeton branch, this was pre-pandemic, a few times a month or less. And I think that really speaks to some of the issues that we were talking about, and maybe more of the regular users are just going straight to Princeton Junction if they're using NJ Transit Rail. So taking all that information in, we wanted to think about the corridor as both a section along the existing Princeton branch, along the existing Dinky line, as well as potential expansions. And so we came up with a sample study corridor in which we were able to conduct our evaluation. Obviously, the alignment of the existing corridor between the Princeton and Princeton Junction stations is relatively fixed, right? It's the corridor. The corridor is what it is, but beyond that, we wanted to evaluate what would be the impacts of potentially expanding service, say, into Princeton. And so that dashed blue line shows a potential transit extension. It's just potential, meaning as a test case, nothing is finalized in any regard to a potential future alignment in Princeton. It was just used as an example for us to test out what would happen to ridership and what we could do with operations if we were to provide an expanded route. So there's additional stations, as you can see in the diamond shapes here. Other thing to note about that extension would be rubber tire. Would not be any rail proposed to extend at this point. And finally, other things to note about the Princeton branch corridor itself was in all of the alternatives, which we'll talk about in a moment, have the parallel ped bike path that would operate alongside of whatever alignment or whatever service was chosen for the corridor, and providing connections to things like the DNR Canal Trail and the Dinky Line Trail, as well as potential new stations along that section of the corridor to enhance connections to some of those residential areas that exist, provide opportunities to connect into some of that planned growth, and also open opportunities, say along Alexander Road, for example, for some transit-oriented development opportunities. So 3 alternative concepts were ultimately developed for the corridor, including a 4th alternative, which is the no build. And the no build is essentially required for our analysis process. It's required as part of federal processes, EA, EIS. EIS is because it is essentially the baseline. What would happen in the future if we did nothing on the corridor? I'm going to just come out right now and say it because I'm sure everybody really wants to know. But ultimately, what we want to recommend at the end of this study is alternative 1 to be advanced for further consideration, and of course we have to include alternative 4 because it's required for us to include alternative 4. Alternatives 2 and 3 are being dismissed, and I'm going to talk over the next several slides, describe each alternative, and walk you through the process of how we arrived at that recommendation. So the first thing I want to say about all of the alternatives, we're anticipating the use of electric vehicles, whether it's rail or rubber tire service, but all electric. Not only is that the direction NJ Transit's going, that's the direction most agencies are going. There's fewer emissions and also quieter operations with electric vehicles. So alternative 1 is our dedicated transit roadway with embedded light rail. So what that means is that essentially you're going to take the existing dinky line and construct a paved roadway, 1 lane in each direction for the most part, with an embedded rail. And the embedded rail would go between the existing Princeton and Princeton Junction stations, and it would be a light rail style vehicle. In addition to running a light rail style vehicle on the existing, the existing limits of the existing dinky line, the BRT or bus rapid transit style vehicles would operate on the Princeton branch as well as then expand into our connections into West Windsor and Princeton. We looked at several different service frequencies. There's new stations, and also I would like to note that all 3 of these alternatives would require a new maintenance facility for the new vehicles. Alternative 2 is very similar to alternative 1, except in alternative 2, we're essentially taking the rail out of the roadway and keeping it on the existing alignment. So the existing rail would stay in place, but we would operate a light rail style vehicle instead of a heavy rail style vehicle. And there would be a parallel roadway for those bus vehicles. And the intention of that is so that we can still be providing 1-seat rides from downtown Princeton, West Windsor, and adjacent communities all the way through the entire length of the corridor. And then alternative 3 would be just a dedicated transit roadway, no rail as part of that. In addition to thinking about what the operations would look like, we also looked at how we connect to the corridor. Again, thinking about this resource, which is the dinky line, as more than just a corridor between the Princeton station and Princeton Junction, really a way for people to integrate with the rest of the community and move around via a lot of different modes. And the way we do that is establishing mobility hubs at the stations. 3 levels of mobility hubs would be anticipated: our local stations, our secondary hubs, which would be things like Nassau Street or Princeton North or the Princeton station itself, where more services would be coming together. There'd be bicycle and scooter parking, real-time information, shelters, bike pump and tool station, charging stations, and then ultimately going all the way to our primary hub, which would be the Princeton Junction station, which has a lot of modes coming in. We're anticipating other amenities like lockers and charging stations and shelter or climate-controlled shelters or waiting areas and things of that nature. In terms of our vehicles, we're envisioning LRT light rail style vehicles. These are just examples. This is at the bottom is existing NJ Transit light rail, but light rail style vehicles, because they're more flexible, would allow more stations to be provided along the Princeton branch corridor. Again, like I said before, electric propulsion, branded service, onboard amenities like onboard Wi-Fi, and future accommodations for automated operations as that technology advances. Now, the next two slides, I'm going to show some example cross sections so you guys can get a sense of what we're looking at when we're talking about these different options in terms of their size and their scope. So this cross section would be, imagine if you're standing just east of the US 1 corridor. So on the east side of the US 1 corridor, looking back towards US 1, you can see alternative 1. At the top, we have our shared path, a small buffer between the path and then the transitway, which had the embedded rail, as well as the regular rubber tire service. Alternative 2 is much more extensive than alternative 1 in terms of the width of the corridor, or the width of the right-of-way that would be required between the shared use path, the rail corridor itself, as well as the parallel busway. And then alternative 3 would have the smallest cross section with just the roadway and the shared use path. Going a little bit further south on the corridor, we're talking near the proposed Roselle Road station, what that could look like in terms of the cross section. And really what I want to point out is alternative 2. And one of the main reasons alternative 2 was not considered further. Within this section, east of US 1, the corridor right-of-way gets relatively narrow, and there's a lot of adjacent residential on the north side and some infill or some commercial development on the south side. And with the proposed corridor having the rail separate from the roadway, there was potential for some property impacts, which were obviously something that we wanted to avoid, and which was one of the main reasons alternative 2 is no longer being considered. But alternative 1 and alternative 3 generally stay within the existing right-of-way for much of the corridor. There are some areas further towards Princeton, around the on the west side of US 1, which has some where the path may extend slightly out of the right-of-way, but in general, alternatives 1 and 3 stay within the existing Princeton branch right-of-way. Within the town segment, we obviously recognize that there is congestion, and we want to try to enhance the circulation of the transit vehicles through, in this case, Princeton, for example, which we're showing here. And some of the features would be transit signal priority, so giving early greens or extending the green for buses that are approaching. Branded stations, I think branding is very important throughout the entire corridor to provide that link that everybody can easily recognize that this is the corridor and this is where it's going to go and the type of service it provides. There's potential to explore other features like flexible lanes for transit priority during peak periods. So essentially maybe in the AM peak or the PM peak, some on-street parking would be restricted between University Place and Witherspoon, potentially to provide a bus lane that would operate during just those peak periods. So these are different things that we could do in the future as it gets closer into, as we get further along in the process, it can be examined in more detail. In addition, we recognize that Witherspoon Street is currently converted to one-way, going away from Nassau Street. And we thought a little bit about that, and we just had some discussions with Princeton in that regard. We really felt like the Witherspoon Street was a great test case for our, was a great test potential corridor, I should say, for the extended service. There's higher density residential along that section. And it also, those neighborhoods in that area have some higher percentages of zero and one income, or not one income, zero or one vehicle ownership households, which would be particularly positive for transit ridership generation. We thought it was important to serve that area. So we looked at a few different options of what we could do to accommodate the Witherspoon Street one-way operation. One would be simply to just divert the southbound operation along Holfish Street to Palmer Square, or conversely, to install some transit-only signals that would allow some contraflow operations to occur on Witherspoon Street through that one-way segment. Here's an example rendering of what a potential station could look like. So, this example would be a potential station at Nassau Street. You can see several of the features with bike and scooter parking, real-time information, you can see a branded design station with level boarding. So that means the kind of curb comes up a little bit higher at the station to allow level boarding. Not only does that enhance the ability for folks to move on and off the vehicles more efficiently, but of course, it is a significant benefit for ADA riders. So level boarding is an important part of the design of these platforms. And you can see also a more LRT style vehicle, but it is rubber tire, but something that is an LRT style, more attractive type of BRT vehicle than a standard bus. And also to be a little bit, wouldn't be some BRTs in some areas are much longer. This one would be potentially a little bit shorter so that we can navigate along those the more narrow turns that exist in downtown Princeton. So we talked about the Transitway segment and we talked about the extension into Princeton. So let's talk about how we connect those two. And there's 3 different options that we're looking at that could be explored further as we advance the study. The first one, option 1, would be for the BRT rubber tire vehicles to utilize the existing station driveway to access Alexander Street, and then from Alexander Street, go to University Place. Option 2, essentially those buses would come up onto South Drive and utilize the existing Station Drive connection to Alexander Street where there's an existing signal. And then option 3 would be to extend the transitway along the former right-of-way that was removed as part of the station relocation. So for many of you, remember when the station was located a little bit further north of the existing location. So this opportunity would be to extend that, or this option, I should say, would be to potentially extend that option or that right-of-way back to University Place. So would obviously benefit the rubber tire BRT vehicles the most because they could avoid the roundabout and the traffic signal, but obviously this has pretty substantial impacts to the university. So we're looking at these 3, and either one could be applied to any of the selected alternatives. Moving further along the corridor, here's an example of what a potential Roselle Road station could look like. So this is actually on the Princeton, the Dinky Line corridor, and it's showing you the option 1, alternative 1, which is the embedded rail, and showing you a potential LRT vehicle on that. And you can see common features. There's a consistent branding and a consistent style throughout, and that's what we want to make. It doesn't necessarily have to be this style in particular, but the idea is to maintain a consistent style and branding throughout the corridor. And then finally, how this connects all the way down at Princeton Junction Station. So what we're looking at, a few different options, but this is one that we're considering for alternative 1. The roadway would diverge off of the rail as it approaches the Princeton Junction Station. The buses would utilize some of the existing roadway circulation within the station area to circulate, discharge, and pick up passengers at the Princeton Junction Station platform, and then either return along the right-of-way back towards Princeton, or potentially going up onto 571 and into West Windsor, or even potentially going straight north on this page and accessing the proposed TOD. So there's a lot of different options of what could happen ultimately at this end of the line. So we met with stakeholders. We shared these preliminary alternatives with our stakeholders, and we also had some additional survey outreach that went out in December. And from that, we heard from the respondents that about 48% of the respondents ranked alternative 1 as their most preferred. So that's certainly the highest percentage of any of the alternatives, and a relatively high, about a third of the respondents ranked it as their second most preferred option. Alternative 3 received the lowest of the preferred option rankings. And alternative 4 as well. That's, obviously it's not really, the no build is not really enhancing service at all. So it's one of the reasons why I think, that scored relatively low overall. And when we asked folks what they liked most about alternative 1, if they ranked it top, they liked the service frequency, the connections to the downtown, and the new pedestrian and bicycle path as kind of their top 3 reasons for selecting alternative 1. We took that feedback and looked at several other measures of effectiveness, let's call them, or evaluation criteria. We looked at potential peak period frequency, enhanced community connections, equity, mobility, right-of-way, which is property impacts, potential environmental impacts, impacts to existing transit, and cost. And we ranked those on a scale of 1 to 5, or scored them on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being either a low potential benefit or a high negative impact, and 5 on the other end being either a high degree of potential improvement and or a low negative impact. So once we scored all of the alternatives based on that criteria, we arrived at a highest total score went to alternative 1 with 37 points. Lowest score went to alternative 2 with 28 points, or sorry, lowest score of the build alternatives was alternative 2 at 28 points, and overall lowest score was 26 points with the no build. However, as I mentioned, the no build is something we have to keep along as part of the different federal processes that will have to be engaged in as the project moves forward. So our recommendations are to advance alternatives 1, which is a dedicated transit roadway with embedded rail, and alternative 4, which is the no build, because we essentially have to do that. We picked alternative 1 advances because it was the most favorable based on our outreach survey. It was highest ranked based on our alternatives analysis, which considered a lot of different other factors. It meets the project purpose, need, and goals while minimizing the property and environmental impacts. And then, of course, alternative 4 is recommended only to advance only because it's required as part of the EIA and EIS processes. And finally, our next steps. So we're here today to obtain feedback, and we'll continue to obtain feedback from our stakeholders as well. We're going to refine the analysis based on the feedback we receive and issue a final study report. Beyond that, there's a potential for NJ Transit to engage in some preliminary design work for alternative 1, but that's something that's to be determined. There's no timeline for that at the moment. And then on the municipal side, I think it's important for the municipalities that are along the corridor and within these extension areas to start thinking about how can we be supportive in connecting the proposed pedestrian and bicycle facilities together, especially the proposed parallel pedestrian bike path, as well as what measures need to be taken to support TOD supportive zoning, so that if there are in the future additional stations that that's kind of queued up for some transit oriented development along those locations. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Mia, and we can open up for questions if you like, however you want to proceed.
If you can just stop sharing your screen so we can see each other. Great. Okay, so just to reiterate, we have representatives here from environmental groups, planning, our business community, bike and pedestrian safety, senior and affordable housing advocates. So we're going to try to take a representative sampling, or I'm going to try to get at least one question from each group. And let's see, Michael, since you're still our planner, fortunately, I'm going to give the first question to you.
Thank you, Councilwoman. I'll be real quick because I know a lot of people want to speak. I noticed one of the early slides was labeled project goals, and I think there was a missing goal there that we should really have on. It did not say anything about trying to build ridership, and I think increasing ridership has to be one of the major project goals because it's going to impact how we make decisions about the mode and the route and the extent of service we want to expand. So I really think that's important. And related to that, I really think we have to stress transit-oriented development more. And we've got some great opportunities coming up, particularly with the municipal master plan, which is going to be updated this year into next year. We need some strong language in that talks about transit-oriented development to increase ridership on the Dinky, and then have the Dinky, expanded further through the community, through downtown. But also we've got to talk to the university about updating their campus plan, because right now all the development's been to the east and to the south and to West Windsor, and it's been away from the Dinky line. We really want to encourage transit-oriented development. So those were some of my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Sam Bunting. I don't know how to introduce you. Someone who's interested in many topics in Princeton, I'll just let you ask your question.
I'm a former member of the Princeton Traffic and Transportation Commission before it was disbanded, would be one way to describe me. So I have a long-standing interest in transportation in the town. And I have to say, I'm very excited about the proposal, very supportive of the preferred alternative. And I hope that we can move forward with it quickly. I had one particular question, and that relates to the nature of the rolling stock that you're proposing to use for the light rail. Can you comment? It is my understanding that there are no battery electric light rail vehicles in use in the NJ Transit fleet at this moment in time. So do you have a sense of what kind of equipment you would be using? And would it make Princeton very special and forward thinking to be the first in the state to be using such equipment?
Do we, that's,
I don't know if somebody,
Yeah, this is New Jersey
oh, there.
Transit. Yeah, we really haven't focused on what the specific vehicle will be. You know, we do know that it'll be electric. We do anticipate that there will be developments in the technology over the intervening years. We're seeing rapid developments now, and the intention of the study was to take advantage of state-of-the-art rail vehicle and transit vehicle technology, including the possibility in the future that we might be able to have some level of automated operation. So we can't say what the vehicle will be. We can't say if it'll be battery or overhead, or who knows what it'll be by the time we implement. We just know that the intent is to implement something like that by the time we're ready to do so.
Just to remind everyone to ask a question, you can raise your virtual hand at the bottom of the screen. Adam Biermann is a member of the Public Transit Advisory Committee. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, thank you. And thank you for this presentation. It was quite interesting. We're looking into the future. It's exciting. Just one general question is just, am I getting too ahead of myself about dedicated funding? This seems really, we need to do it. It seems pretty expensive, and what kind of what stakeholders will be involved in the decision process, state, local, federal, EPA. And the second one, quickly, the university, I heard someplace, and again, maybe this is too much minutia, that they're in favor of 2 new stations, but they wanted only bus. They don't want any light rail to it. Is any truth to that? But I guess the main thing is, when we get there, what about funding? How do we get dedicated funding?
Is there someone from New Jersey Transit who wants to answer that?
Yes, we're here. The study isn't about funding. We know that funding is an issue. It's an issue for this and many other potential projects. The focus of this study is to look at what can be done in the corridor and get a sense about what the benefits will be and what the costs will be, so that we can understand what the needs will be.
Okay. Phil Chow is a member of the planning board. Phil, we can't hear you. Still can't hear you.
Is that okay?
Yes, great.
Sorry. Two questions. My preference is alternative 3, and I saw in the scoring that you said the frequency is lower for alternative 3. Can you address that? Because, you know, alternative 3 to me seems the cheapest in terms of capital costs, but I don't understand why the frequency is lower than alternative 1. And then somewhat related to that, and I think this is more of a question for the town, is, you know, we always have so much parking issues downtown. What does NJ Transit, what do the town officials envision for parking, taking advantage of this transitway to kind of move parking away from downtown and encourage people park far away, hop on the dinky, get downtown, and not deal with traffic downtown? So I'd like to hear what people have to say about that. Thank
Well,
you.
Phil, I'm just gonna answer the town part, which is that, you know, I think we all know that the permit parking discussion has been a very heated one in recent months. And I, speaking for myself, have felt that the long-term solution that we should be looking at, rather than expanding parking within Princeton, is to look at using building into something like this to have satellite parking, and that would be really the best long-term solution. I'll let the New Jersey Transit answer the first part of your question.
Yeah, I can speak to the first part of the question, and I would just like to note, we're still evaluating and refining our operational schemes. But when we were looking at that peak period frequency scoring category was based on the frequency of service. So if anybody's standing on the transit corridor itself, on the Princeton branch corridor itself, at any of the stations, how often will some sort of vehicle be there to pick them up rather than rail or bus? So on the reason why the frequency of alternative 3 was scored a little bit lower was because we don't have the rail element. So there's a larger gap between for that segment of the corridor. There's a potentially larger gap between alternatives 3 and alternatives 1 and 2, where we have both the bus and the rail also operating. And there's not to say that we couldn't enhance alternative 3 with increasing the bus frequency to match what the bus plus rail is doing on the other alternatives. It's just how it was evaluated.
Marco? And Marco is a member of the Transit Committee.
Hi, thanks, everybody. Nice presentation. I'm also, like Philip, a big proponent of utilizing and leveraging parking along this beautiful route that we have. And I think it's going to require a partnership between the university, the town, and New Jersey Transit to create perhaps garages, satellite garages. I also think a garage could be created on the Princeton dinky lot there as a hub also. And I think that might solve our problems with employee parking and other things that we have, and bringing, you know, having visitors, a welcoming place that visitors can park and easily get into the center of town. You know, let's make sure we can work together. And the university has most of the land, so we're kind of beholden to them in some ways. And New Jersey Transit, you didn't want to talk about the funding, but with the bill that was passed in Congress on infrastructure, New Jersey got so many millions of dollars, I know, for transit infrastructure. Is there any line items for this enhancement of the dinky that's in that line item budget that New Jersey proposed to the federal government? Thank you.
Is there an answer to that?
Okay, so as far as what happens with federal funding, the reason we're doing it, the steps we're taking now, is to start to develop a concept that can advance to a point where when you go for federal grants, they really want to see shovel-ready projects. They don't want to see something that's a line on a drawing, which, you know, we're trying to bring it past the line on a drawing and bring it to a set of alternatives, you know, including the no build, where if you go through the federal process, it's best to have something more advanced and more thought through, and that would include your forecasting, environmental, et cetera. We're trying to get to that point, And it's when you get to that point and you have things in better shape, that's when it's a lot easier to get the grants. And we're just not there yet.
Okay. I'm trying to give transit committee members the first opportunity to speak. So Jessica Wilson, who's a graduate student and also a member of the committee.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. I have one question and a few comments. The question is, does Michael notice that there is not listed as a project goal increasing ridership, but I would also like as a project goal decreasing greenhouse gas emissions, and the way you do that is with ridership. And my comment relates to that. When we did our study of Princeton, the Princeton Transit Mobility Survey, we found when we asked people what would cause them to ride public transit, they said frequency, or there's a stop near my house. So I really like the branch of bus rapid transit that goes into North Princeton. I think that is essential for boosting ridership. I also think increasing frequency is essential for boosting ridership. The interval that seemed most popular in our survey was 11 to 20 minutes. So if anyone has to wait longer than 20 minutes, I don't think they'll take the bus or the train.
Thanks, Jessica. That is, I agree. Tinika, who is our liaison from the Bike Ped Committee to the Transit Committee. Go ahead.
Hi, thank you. Can I just say how excited I am about Alternative One? I think if I can take a bus that comes reasonably close to my house and get to Princeton Junction Station in one go, I would take it. And you know, I would leave my car behind. And also I would tell all my friends who are coming to visit me about it, and you know, so that they have an option to ride New Jersey Transit in, because they know that they can get reasonably close to my house. I am very excited about the pedestrian and bicycle path. I'm in the market for an EV right now, but I think that EV is much more likely to have 2 wheels than 4. And so that suddenly makes Princeton Junction Station reachable for me. And so my question is, how will you future-proof bicycle parking at Princeton Junction Station in particular, but really all the other stations? Because, you know, right now there aren't that many people who bike, but hopefully that will expand. And so, you know, I'm Dutch, I'm from Delft, population 100,000, which is not that far from the population of Princeton and West Windsor once the expansion happens. Also has 1 university, it's also flat, and the central station has 7,000 bicycle parking spots. And now people are saying, why were you so unambitious? because it's full. And so it would be great to have, if not immediate parking, you know, that many parking spots. I know it's not reasonable right now, but at least expansion plans.
Thanks, Tinika.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Mike.
Okay. So there's some good news. We have actually been able to talk to our police about some sample bike lockers that they would actually accept. We haven't been putting in new lockers since 9/11. We've been allowing the grandfathered ones to continue. In the case of Princeton Junction, we were able to relocate some unused lockers and bring them to Princeton Junction. Working with West Windsor, they were very helpful, and you know, they came out to these other places, took the lockers apart, and brought them to Princeton Junction and installed them. So moving forward, we think we're going to have some new type of lockers that the police will accept, and we're also looking at bike stations. We have a pilot going on right now in North Jersey for some. It's an RFP that's out for some bike station companies that come in. So this is probably a large enough scale where we can actually locate some areas for bike station, as well as, expand lockers. So they're both of those are possibilities and would definitely be in any plan that includes the bikeway. The other thing to mention with that is that bike share, and I know some people frown with scooters, but I mean, in Asbury Park, the planner there instituted a scooter share where they had to follow very strict rules, speed limits, etc. And they were very successful. So we're not saying we're going that far here on our end, but what I'm saying is micromobility includes bicycles, scooters, pedestrians, etc. There's a lot of users. I don't want to see a Vespa or a moped necessarily on a trail, but these are things that will have to be discussed further. But to answer the initial question is yes, we plan on having more facilities, bicycle facilities at anything that gets planned out.
Christine, do you still have a question, or was that your question?
I do still have a question. Sorry.
Okay, let me just
Jessica.
Christine is the new director of Sustainable Princeton, and she is their liaison to the Transit Committee. Go ahead, Christine.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could elaborate on that scoring rubric, how you came up with the score for environmental and equity scores. Did you take into account, increased ridership would reduce vehicle miles traveled for single occupancy vehicles?
Sorry, I thought I was on mute still. So in terms of the environmental impacts, we did consider ridership as kind of a benefit for that, but all the ridership initial estimates we used for this analysis, so we're kind of all around the same. So the differentiating factor when it came to the environmental impacts was the impact to our sensitive areas of wetlands, wetlands buffers, forested areas, especially in the areas around the canal, which have their own set of rules. So that's where the differentiating factor on the environmental impact side. On the equity side, again, because most of the alternatives, they all include the potential expansions into some of those key areas are identified with higher densities, lower incomes, lower auto ownership, as well as that further Princeton North Station potentially serving the planned lower income housing that's planned out in that area. It all basically received a similar score, which is providing an overall benefit to enhanced connections to those communities with no significant negative impacts.
But then if I could follow on, so are you able to determine what emissions reduction is in the option 1 versus the no build?
We have not done that as part of this study. We did not calculate that.
Hey, Adam, this is Lou. I want to jump in with a quick comment. We're hearing a recurring theme, which is it seems like there's a concern that ridership development wasn't focused on, and maybe we just worded it incorrectly, but one of the early goals, and we stated that we were intending to address the ridership decline. All of the alternatives demonstrate an increase in ridership. We expect them to all perform well. All of the alternatives, as well as no build, are electric. And in terms of congestion relief, it's important to remember, because we heard some concerns about buses and buses increasing traffic. The way to think about it is that the number of people on the bus are that, whatever that number is that many fewer cars on the road. And generally, the way we view transit is the more people take transit, the less traffic there is. So we view it as a benefit. So we're all into ridership. And I also wanted to thank the prior person who asked the question and expressed enthusiasm. We appreciate that. We are enthusiastic as well.
Councilwoman Perron Lambros.
I think some of my questions were answered already, but the frequency was on the alternative one, which, I mean, this is really a transformative concept for our town. I mean, with all of the housing you've you've picked where the centers of commerce are, and where all the housing would be focused. So the corridor works really wonderfully, I think, with the plan at hand of the needs today and the needs for down the road in the future. The frequency was what, 20 minutes, 30 minutes to do that route, that loop back and forth? I was curious about that. And then is it that I guess you get off the rail and then you change to the tired bus, and then that takes you through the loop and then the university corridor, obviously, University Road corridor seems like it would be the most direct route right into the downtown area. So, and I was going to say, but we've already said it, that this would also help with the employee parking and patron parking, where we would be shuttling people in, and if there's enough frequency, that would work really well.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit more to the operations to answer your question. So the frequency was looked at both.
Oh, Adam,
me or
no, we lost you for a minute there, Adam, if you just want to back up for.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
It says my internet connection is unstable. So please, if I apologize if I drop out again. So what I was saying was we looked at frequency for the BRT component and the LRT component separately, because in alternative one, the LRT has a single track for most of it, although there is a passing track to allow for increased frequency. So the LRT frequency would be 15 minutes peak, 30 minutes off peak. The BRT component, which would be the service that would extend into the community, would be at a 10-minute peak and a 15-minute off-peak service. So very frequent service. And that's why we're looking also with the smaller vehicles, that type of service frequency would potentially work. So overall, what would happen is, let's say you were at the Princeton Junction station and you were trying to get to the Nassau Street. You could do one of two things. You could either jump on a BRT vehicle and sit on the BRT vehicle the whole way to the Nassau Street station, or you could get on the LRT and then transfer at the end, depending on what mode you prefer. We recognize, I think one of the things we heard through our outreach is that the rail component is very important to some folks because of the history of the rail. And so that's one thing we wanted to echo with alternative one, was maintaining a rail component, but you could use the rail or the BRT service.
Great. All right. Thank you. It's very exciting. Thanks.
Zenon Tekcharny, who is a member of the planning board and the liaison to the planning board from the Environmental Commission. Go ahead, Zenon.
All right. Yeah, so a lot of what I was thinking already has been mentioned. Michael LaPlace did a good job at talking about how it's important to think about land use as well. I know that this is a transit study, but you can't really just talk about transit without thinking about land use. I think that there's a lot of opportunity for density along the line and increased ridership. I think that some of the earlier numbers that I saw about riders, I think that it could be double or triple that if it's done right. And I also think that the types of uses should be thought about. I mean, I think that we need to be thinking about how we can get amenities like grocery stores on transit lines so that people don't have to leave town to go shopping at the grocery store, the big grocery stores. But overall, I would like to say that this is great. This is really moving in a great direction. I want to see it happen. And that's why I'm kind of concerned. I mean, I don't mind alternative one, but I do think that alternative three made a lot more sense just because of the costs. I mean, it's $50 million more to do alternative one. And so when you talk about millions, it's kind of like beyond what I can really comprehend. So maybe, if there's a lot of money from the Fed that, can help make it happen and it'll be all right, then maybe it doesn't make a difference. But I think about things, fiscally and And I want to make sure that, whatever that's proposed actually does happen. So, it would be good to kind of think about the feasibility of it. I guess some other thoughts, were, I guess, in terms of the route. I mean, this is kind of like, getting into the weeds, but I think that it probably makes more sense to have the bus or the tram or whatever you want to call it run back up Wholefish and then Chambers instead of going through that loop in Palmer Square. I also think that I'm curious why Roselle Road was picked. I mean, I think that University Drive and Carnegie Center Drive probably made more sense in terms of that location. I know that it was one of the ideas on the original presentation. I think that having that connection to Carnegie Center, where there's the hotel and a lot of jobs, seemed to make more sense. But I was just curious if there was any reasoning for that. That's pretty much it for now.
I can answer the question about. I appreciate all your comments, but I can answer the question about the station, the Roselle Road Selection Station. I don't think we're fixed to any particular exact location along that section of the corridor. We were just looking at station spacing, and also, we wanted to be able to connect the residential community on the north side into it, and so we aligned it with Roselle Road, because in that portion, there's a local neighborhood street on the north side that comes down along the tracks, and other locations along there would have been a little bit more challenging because there's some homes along the tracks and then there's a park further up. So, but it's certainly something that, would get refined as we move forward in the study.
And I just would like to reiterate a little bit of what Adam said, is that a lot of this is just purely conceptual in nature. So the routing that you've seen is still just, preliminary concepts, and nothing is set at this point. So, all of those discussions are still to happen, and those issues we'll work through, but it is just a conceptual study at this point.
Oh, actually, there's one more thing. Sorry to dovetail on that. I was just curious if any other routes were thought through. So, like, I mean, it's I guess good to have like a fixed route, but it's could be a good idea to potentially have smaller units that run different routes, potentially to the market fair or the mall or something like that. And I know that gets into a whole level of complication, but I was just curious if that was something that was thought through or thought about.
Now, we had initially given some thought to looking at other connections, and even within Princeton itself, we thought about we thought about a loop, but recognizing that there are some substantial inefficiencies with loop routing. Also connections on Route 1 to other shopping areas, like you said, like the mall. But I think, the opportunity is there. One of the important things that we want to note is that in addition to the BRT service and the LRT service, an alternative one, we want to make this corridor available for tie-ins to other transit. So you could have a NJ Transit bus that comes up Route 1, exits, and then gets on the corridor and goes to Princeton Junction or downtown Princeton or whatever. You could have some variations on services that are not specifically branded services that we're looking at as part of this study, but could be other NJ Transit routes or even university routes or Princeton routes that could all tie in together.
Thanks.
Justin Lesko, who is our senior planner.
Great, thank you. In response to Councilwoman Perron Lambros's question before, you touched upon frequency of the BRT and the LRT. Will they run the same hours of operation? Will one be the 9 to 5 and the other is the kind of extended hours? And just generally speaking, does this alternative allow for extended hours, maybe longer weekend hours?
Well, I can start. And what we were envisioning is we do have a more detailed operational analysis, and we're we were looking at to answer those specific questions. So the LRT could be a is intended to be a peak period and then have an off peak period that's more in the kind of in the middle of the day, and some typical I don't know, hold on, I'm trying to gather my thoughts because I realize I'm probably not making a lot of sense. So the LRT component is going to have operational hours where the frequency increases during the peaks, but it will also have off-peak operations. The time that it would start and end is still something to be determined on that. We envision, at least for our analysis of potential ridership, that the BRT service would have more later service, potentially say on weekends and things like that. But again, this is still something that's going to be worked out as it gets closer to the next phases of the project.
Okay, so it sounds like there can be operational efficiencies depending on which one's going, but for the person riding it that has to get from point A to point B, it'll be kind of a better situation for them.
Correct. I mean, throughout most of the day and into the evening, we're going to be looking, and even on weekends and Saturday, the way that it's analyzed is a service that's operating 10 minutes peak, 15 minutes off peak, even on the weekends is what was analyzed. Not to say that that's what's going to be what's actually going to happen in the future, but that's what it was analyzed. So, our idea was to ensure that we have a minimum service time or minimum frequency. So that minimum frequency on the BRT side is 10 minutes in peak, 15 minutes off peak. But if you're on the Transitway corridor and there's rail operating at the same time, you're probably, because of we have both services going at different frequencies, we're looking at a 6 to 10 minute for some sort of vehicle to show up at a station during a peak period. You're looking at about 6 to 10 minutes. So if you're standing either at the Princeton or one of the new Canal Point or Roselle Road stations or the Princeton Junction station.
Okay, and then just lastly, and I'll stop, but then I guess the third option for you too would be take a bike, take a scooter share or whatever down the line.
Exactly.
Correctly?
Correct. If making those connections could all happen if the parallel ped bike path, you could ride all the way to Princeton Junction, and I think it provides flexibility to encourage active modes, right? Because you're looking at the weather report, maybe it's going to rain in the evening, well, you can ride your bike into the station in the morning, but maybe the weather is not so great in the afternoon, and maybe you load it up onto the BRT vehicle or LRT vehicle and take that back. So I think the integration with the micromobility is a key component.
Great, thank you.
Anita Groniak is the head of the Save the Dinky, which is a local group that has done a lot of advocacy on behalf of this line.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for the presentation. I have a few questions. One, you mentioned the stakeholders. Can you tell us who those stakeholders are, and did they include the university? Also, if you have spoken to the university, did you discuss the MOU, the Memorandum of Understanding? My understanding from that is that the right-of-way, which is on university property, can be used as long as there is heavy rail. So what happens if we are changing to a busway or to light rail? What would be the ramifications there? The other, you had mentioned extending the roadway back to the old station buildings, which are now a restaurant. Why not extend the rail track back to that location? Also, was there any thought given to a double track, which would make meeting trains? Now there's an issue with meeting inbound and outbound trains coming from New York City. There's a considerable wait. Either you have to go earlier or you have to wait when you're coming back to meet the train. Why not? Wasn't that a thought of a double track would solve that issue? Also, how does the speed of the light rail compare to the heavy rail? Is this going to be faster than the current dinky or slower than the current dinky? We know there's a curve in that line now. It has to slow down to go around that curve. Will this impede the speed? And I think you might have covered some of this, but I was just thinking that from your furthest point, are you saying it's 30 minutes from the furthest station that you proposed to either the southbound or northbound platform once you get to the junction?
Well, I'll answer that last question. So the frequency that we're talking about is just how often does a vehicle arrive to transport somebody. If we're looking at overall travel time, we did do an analysis of overall travel time looking from the Princeton North Station, well, actually any station along the line, but let's talk about the Princeton North Station, which is the furthest one out. And we estimate the total travel time would be approximately, I believe, don't quote me on this because I would have to pull it up, but I believe it was around 25 minutes from Princeton Junction to that furthest Princeton North Station. I don't know if NJ Transit wants to answer anything about the double track or some of those other questions.
Yeah, hi, Chris D'Elia from New Jersey Transit. I'll answer the first, I guess, two parts of the question pertaining to the stakeholders. So as far as the stakeholders who were selected, we, made a conscious effort to involve, I mean, you think of the position, it was probably included. We're talking planners, engineers, council members, people in the mayor's office, business administrators, planners, local professionals, various individuals who, live in the community, have the pulse of the community. They probably study this stuff much more with a keen eye than Transit did prior to this study. And even still to this point, I mean, one of the important reasons why we wanted to engage with those people is one is to get that professional feedback on what they're hearing from their constituents, but as well as to use them sort of as an additional mouthpiece to be able to relay, specific messaging to their constituents. And, that process for Transit, the sort of sidebar, was twofold because we did have a public website for the page. All of the surveys, to my knowledge, that were shared with the stakeholders, we had also made available to actual riders. Anyone who submitted a public comment requested to be added to an email list, received updates both on this meeting and when other surveys have come out. So, from an outreach end, we know that Transit obviously is the company that it is, and it's quite large. But we wanted to make sure that our reach and our scope, as far as who we were engaging with, was as broad as it possibly could be, which is why we engaged not only with those elected and appointed and other community stakeholders that are really in touch with the community, but also to engage with the general public and the people who are consistently riding the service on a more frequent basis. I think that was.
So, the university was not in that conversation. They have not been approached about.
Oh,
this.
yes. No. Thank you for jogging my memory. There was quite a bit. So yes, no, the university has been involved in those conversations, the MOU. Now that was the second part. I apologize.
Yeah.
We are aware, have been made aware, and I can say with full transparency, and I would assume that there's probably even university officials attending this meeting today, but New Jersey Transit would not proceed with any type of planning or development of any concepts that didn't have the necessary buy-in from all of the important community stakeholders, that including the university as well.
So that if we
And
lost
Lou, do you
the
want to
right,
take the? I'm sorry, go ahead.
so if the heavy rail was removed, the right of way would still exist for New Jersey Transit.
Yeah, I'll pass it over.
We're just making this all work here in an NJ Transit conference room.
We could have sent you each an individual link. We're that generous.
We wanted to be together.
Okay.
Let's just think about.
We can't hear you.
Railroad for a second.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to get as close to the laptop without actually swallowing it. The rail right of way, I guess you're all familiar with the Princeton branch. It is a single track line. In the days of old, meaning 20 plus years ago, it was a wonderful, graceful operation because we didn't have as high a rail service on the Northeast Corridor. The dinky trains met the corridor trains, people transferred, they proceeded to New York, and all was right with the world. And then economic growth happened in New Jersey. And with that, ridership growth, especially on the Northeast Corridor. The Northeast Corridor is the king of commuter rail lines in the United States. Just in terms of the number of trains that we operate on that line, it's the most densely populated in terms of passenger miles, rail line, I think, in the Western Hemisphere. So we operate a lot more trains, and that sounds great, except, you know, you go back to the Princeton branch and it's just a single track line. There's only so much you could do on that line. It means that you're not going to be able to meet all the trains. Now, we didn't advance a double tracking of the Princeton branch because the environmental impacts and the capital costs would be so tremendous, and they would never qualify we don't think they would qualify for federal funding relative to the ridership benefits. But to us, rail is rail, and we expect that a light rail alternative is going to perform very similarly to the present Arrow 3 rail vehicles. I don't think it's going to be very different at all, just in terms of operating speeds and so forth. I think the performance will be very similar. And actually, the operation should be pretty transparent, whether it is a BRT vehicle or an LRT vehicle. The operations will be coordinated, the schedules will be coordinated so that people can get on to a vehicle at Princeton Junction and proceed to Princeton, regardless of what it is. It's just that the BRT vehicles will extend reach into farther into downtown Princeton. And there might be other operational possibilities for the rubber tired version as well. All that has yet to be borne out, but it's still rail. That's the important thing to remember.
And then the other question was about why not extending the rail track back to the old station buildings? If you're going to put an extension there, why not bring the rail there where it's at street level?
Extending the rail service, the 400 feet, it was cut back.
Right. So there was a suggestion to move to put that road back in there. Why not extend the rail back there? Then
we're
where
not
you're
sure whether even a road is feasible. That's just a possibility. Again, this is high level conceptual work, but extending rail would come with greater impacts and greater costs. This study proceeded with the assumption that the BRT version could extend the reach beyond that 400 feet and actually get to where people want to go farther to downtown Princeton. So that's the tack that this study took.
Okay. Yael? Niv, who's a member of the Princeton Progressive Action Group, and go ahead, Yael.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Hi. So I just wanted to say that I am very, very excited about this plan and everything that you've presented today. We've discussed these ideas in the Princeton Progressive Action Group, and there was a lot of support and excitement. And personally, I can say I moved to the US 15 years ago, and at first I lived in New York and commuted to Princeton daily because I've been working at the university ever since. And it was hard. I would commute each direction, door to door, was 2 hours. And of those 2 hours, the last 3 miles, the Dinky line, accounted for half an hour. So it accounted for a quarter of my commute. For all kinds of reasons. When I started commuting, the trains were not at all aligned. So if you took the fast train from New York, you would arrive literally 1 minute after the Dinky left, and the next Dinky was half an hour later. So there it went, accounting for half an hour of the commute. Or I could take the slower train that was half an hour slower and would actually arrive. So, you know, any way you looked at it, it was half an hour or more of the commute. And back then, 6 months into my time at Princeton, I went to the transportation office and I said, why is there not a bike path along this route? Because I would totally take my bike and bike that path. I biked once on the road and was told that that's a good way to find myself killed. So I only did that once. So I'm very, very excited about this plan. And you've said at different times that all of this is purely conceptual. So I was wondering, conceptual in nature, you said, what is the timeline? So, you know, when can I go back to using public transportation to get to New York, to get to to get to the airport. And I should say also that at some point we moved here and my husband was commuting in the other direction, but that was after I waited 6 years to get a parking permit at Princeton Junction. So it was, you wait 6 years to get tenure at Princeton University as faculty, and at the same time you get a parking permit at Princeton Junction. So I'm really excited to get rid of both of those, not the tenure, and start using public transportation again. And so the question is the timeline. And I also want to make one small kind of plug for, you just said that the Northeast Corridor is, I think you said the king of the train lines here. I agree, but it doesn't behave that way, and that it's not reliable. And taking a train to the airport, you need it to get there when you planned to be there or you miss your flight. So I'm hoping that there's also going to be a push for making the Northeast Corridor much more on time so that we can really enjoy the whole ride.
It's Lou again. I'll jump in and try to speak loudly enough and hold the computer without it seeming like there's an earthquake. So I don't want to get in too much detail about the Northeast Corridor, other than that there is a whole body of work and effort that's going on to advance the Gateway program and Trans-Hudson improvements. We have a major bottleneck as we approach New York. Here you've got a line that has hundreds of passenger trains a day, and it all necks down to just 2 tracks going in and out of New York City that are dispatched by Amtrak. And it leaves no room for error, especially in the peak hours. In terms of timeline, we are hopeful that once we complete this study, that in the next fiscal year, which would start in July, we are going to hope to try to begin work on some early design, which would be the next phase of study. I don't know exactly when that will start, and so that would be the next phase in the planning process. And we do hope that you would come back to transit sooner than that. We do operate a service, and I tried to explain some of the issues that we have, where there's a much higher level of service on the Northeast Corridor than there is on the single track Dinky, because the Dinky line is limited in how many trains we can operate. We change schedules at least twice a year, and maybe with the next roll of the die, there'll be a good connection for you, but we certainly do encourage you to come back to transit.
Okay,
so I didn't understand, what is the timeline for the project to be built? Not the planning. Are we thinking 5 years? Are we thinking 3 years? Are we thinking 10 years?
It's all subject to the availability of funding. We really can't say. The important thing is that we've started a process. Beyond that, we really can't say.
Okay, we have a little bit of a problem. I looked at my phone just a couple minutes ago and it was 6:09, and now all of a sudden it's 6:27. We had promised to wrap up by 6:30, and I also had wanted to try to take a few questions from the general public. So I'm going to put New Jersey Transit on the spot and ask, is there any way you could stay with us at least 15 more minutes?
I'm personally available as long as you need me to be on, so.
Okay,
I can't speak for the rest of NJ Transit.
Hi, Mia. This is Chris from back of the room. 15 minutes would absolutely be appropriate as needed, so we can definitely swing that.
Okay, we'll try to, if we can all just be efficient in our questions. Okay, so I want to get a few questions from our the members of our business community who are here and stand to really be impacted in many positive ways from enhanced transit. So Bob Hillier, I don't think you need an introduction, so go ahead and ask your question. And you're
Bob,
muted.
you're unmuted.
Muted.
About that. Okay, here we are. I thought, Adam, I thought you made an excellent presentation, first of all. Personally, I can't see why we have a redundancy of the light rail and the bike road or the bus road going to the same place. Granted, there's a great concentration of students that might use the light rail, but it seems that with the cost and the complication of it and people getting off of a bus and getting onto the rail or just staying on the bus and going on to Princeton Junction, why spend all this extra money for the rail? And I appreciate the history of the rail, but you know, there was a trolley that went to Trenton and started on Witherspoon Street, and it's no longer here. And I'm not sure that the Dinky is, as long as that route is still there, I'm not sure that it has to be a light rail to maintain the history. That's all.
Okay, so I think was that a question or a comment?
It was a comment.
Okay. Okay, so great, that's even faster. Aubrey, go ahead.
Thank you, Mia. And my question is regarding ridership. I echo Michael's question about it should be on the list of objectives. And it looked like your ridership went from 1,000 down to 500. What would be the, based on your the plan that you have, what would you expect the maximum ridership could be? We have tenants who are completely dependent upon public transit. They do not have cars, many of them. And our retail tenants would love to see the increase in people coming to town on a much greener route, and not on a route that requires parking. So this is a great plan, but I'm looking at the upside. If this were as successful as I think it could be, how much ridership would you expect could be accommodated?
Our preliminary evaluation for the ridership was, well, for the future, we have projected a potential 10-year out build condition, although as Lou said, it's not known at this time, but that was just our projection. For the no build, so a point of comparison, the no build would be about 700 riders per day, and all the alternatives are essentially around the same number, about approximately 2,000 riders per day, and that's with just the existing land use. That does not factor in the potential for TOD, which we know, or infill development as well, which we know would potentially increase ridership. So we're talking about a potential base increase of about 2,000, but certainly more depending on what happens with land use and development.
Wow, that's terrific. Great, thank you, Adam.
Tony Nelson, who is a member of Princeton Future and also a planner.
First of all, Adam, what a very, very interesting presentation, no doubt. Thank you for doing that and answering all these questions. So many good things came up in this. Number one, first of all, I agree with Bob Hilliard. I don't know why we need a redundancy of the train when you have the other system that could actually come up, one ride. But we had Princeton Future also did a little bit of kind of parallel study with you guys. We kind of looked at the 5-minute walking distance, which is the kind of the thing that we typically use to how fast you can go to buses. And what came up the highest, and this will probably shock some of you, was to come up University Place, go down Nassau, up Mercer to the shopping center, down Valley, and then, believe it or not, down Bayard Street and back, and leaving Witherspoon Street as a major pedestrian bicycle corridor. And what it did in terms of pure ridership, it just impacted a significant increase in number of people who could use the system. Now, you know, somebody said, well, loops are inefficient, you have to have it two ways. But in reality, if it was really the light rubber tired vehicle, which I think it would be fantastic, the real question is going to be, if it was a loop like that, you would just serve a significant larger numbers of people if ridership is really the issue. But beyond ridership, it's the whole idea of sustainability in the future. And the other issues were the land use issues, which obviously is something which is really extremely important. But I would really like for you guys to consider that. And also, I thought that the greatest thing here was the idea of using one of those stations as a parking intercept facility. I mean, there was some really great ideas that came up during this particular set of discussion. But first of all, congratulate you guys at Stantec for the good job that you did. But secondly, take Bob Hilliard's suggestion really seriously in terms of money. Maybe we could actually propel this thing a little bit faster if we didn't have this other issue at stake. But also, I would tend to think that you should explore this alternative route because it would just do the job of generating more ridership and leave Witherspoon Street as the major pedestrian bicycle corridor that links right downtown. And then you don't get hassle with all the one-way, two ways running it through, through Palmer Square and what have you. Anyway, those are my thoughts at this point, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Andrew Siegel from Hamilton Jewelers.
Hey, Mia, thanks for inviting me here. And also thanks to New Jersey Transit and Adam. This is a very, very exciting proposition. It actually, I lived in Atlanta for 11 years and transit geeks and urban enthusiasts will maybe recognize the Beltline, the Atlanta Beltline Trail as something that this really reminds me of, especially from the Princeton Junction to the Princeton Station portion, where you have the ability to run transit next to a path connects to the towpath, which is really great for leisure activities and also for transit. So this is pretty cool. Just a couple comments, maybe they become questions, but mostly comments, I assume, to keep things moving. From New Jersey Transit standpoint, I know this is all theoretical at this point, but I saw that there was an opportunity because we have a one-way Witherspoon that you need to go somewhere else back towards the station. And I don't believe that Palmer Square West is your best option. I believe Philip also mentioned that already because of the one-way Witherspoon. There's a lot of cars that use Palmer Square West because there's not a lot of ways to get southbound towards Nassau. And this would just add to the congestion there. So we need to probably find a better way. And I would leave that to you guys, just my 2 cents. Also, I too was a reverse commuter from New York to Princeton until I moved here full time, like Yale. And I too had the 2-hour commutes and the odd times. And actually, one of the things that we're seeing as a business is, especially on weekends right now, up to on some weekends, 1 in 10 of our customers who make purchases are from the New York area, which is really, really interesting. And I think whenever I meet with them, I say, what brought you here? Well, it's a nice town to spend a weekend in, or a nice town to spend a nice day in and get out of the city. And my second question is, how'd you get here? And always it's that they drove, because it takes 2 hours to get here by transit during the weekend and an hour to get here by car on the weekend. So I would really hope that New Jersey Transit considers potentially adding express Northeast Corridor service with this, either going in the opposite direction in mornings so people can spend a day in Princeton, but also potentially on weekends, which would really you could cut the travel time in half and really bring more people to town, not by car, which would be great. From council's perspective, just a few things to think about. I hope that that we'll think about this. So as many people who are going to be coming from New York, not in their cars, we know that still most people come to Princeton by a car. And we know that traffic has been worse downtown since Witherspoon was made one way, and that parking is more limited than ever. So I would not want this project to get derailed because people get very concerned. Derailed, I didn't even mean to say that, but people get concerned about losing a few parking spaces for bus lanes. So I would encourage our town council members to think about this as the larger picture. I know that we're going to be losing more parking spaces downtown, but perhaps that we can do this and put an "and" with it. So we can do this and make diagonal parking on Nassau Street and work with the state to do that so that we can add additional parking spaces and slow traffic down on the street, and everyone wins. We can do this and potentially add garage space, build a new garage. This clearly looks like a long-term project, so perhaps a parking garage would be a long-term project as well, or potentially add levels on our current garages so that we can accommodate the people who drive downtown. This way everyone wins, and I think it's really important for us to keep in mind where people are coming from. But but in general, this sounds amazing. And I'm happy as PMA president to bring it back to our membership, inform them about it, and look forward to seeing how it progresses. Thanks for everyone. Really appreciate this tonight.
Thanks, Andrew. Okay, Marina, we're really running out of time here. Marina, and then Louise, and our mayor is here tonight. So Mark, I don't know if you wanted to ask a few questions, or but I'll give you a moment to think about it. Won't put you on the spot. Marina, go ahead, and then Louise after that.
So thank you again. Absolutely very, very exciting development. And I'm a member of multiple organizations that were already presented, but I'm also speaking here as a parent of middle school children who will be one of hopefully a category of people who are not able to drive themselves around. And if we go with thinking how people who are not able to drive can get around town, the loop that Tony described, or some function of allowing this portion to be used not only to go to New York, but to transport people who can't get themselves anywhere. You know, if my middle school child could get himself on that Tony loop, I would be so thrilled. But my question is, as it relates to option 4, as you move forward with option 1 and option 2, or the expanded and excited option, and comparing it to the base case, what's the danger of option 4 becoming reality? How do you not, you keep saying that we have to carry it along as a comparison for funding purposes. Is there any way to not make them look like you're actually considering doing option 4? Because all of this excitement would just be gone. So if you could talk a little bit about that, that would be great.
I just want to interject that there are many people in the town who actually are excited about option 4. I just felt like I wanted to.
I apologize. When you call it no build option,
right,
it sort of, it gets a little confusing.
So yeah, go ahead, Lou.
The good news is that option 4 is already in place and you could enjoy it today. It is the present service. That's what no build means. It's continuing the present service. The issue is that the vehicles that we operate on that line date back to when the Bee Gees were popular and Saturday Night Fever was the top movie in the country in 1977.
I like his colorful description. See you tomorrow.
It is the truth. And so that is the issue. And the type of vehicle that will replace them is not a vehicle that is suitable for use on the Princeton branch. The train set would have a capacity of about 400, 450 people, which certainly we want to increase ridership, but I don't envision that we would get 450 people on a single trip on the Princeton branch. So you have option 4 now, and we are taking steps to change that to something else later.
Mia, it's Barbara Lazaro from New Jersey Transit. Just before the mayor jumps on, I just want to say thank you to all the participants. I know we're just about running out of time and you want to get the mayor on, but we really appreciate all the feedback and all the excitement that you're sharing with us, because that makes us even more excited to move forward with the next phase of this study. And please continue to give us your feedback. We're all taking notes. We're all going to be reviewing all the feedback you gave us today, but please continue to give us feedback on the website. That is still open and available for comment. So if you think you missed something tonight, please let us know through the website. But thanks to everybody for participating. And I'm sorry for interrupting and taking some of your time, Mayor.
Yeah, that's fine. Let me just jump in. I'll be super quick. First of all, thank you, New Jersey Transit, and thanks to everybody that participated tonight. Mia, thanks for setting this up. Look, I'm really excited about this, but I think the thing to remember is New Jersey Transit is stressed. This is a concept only. We are years away from anything happening. Money's got to be found and everything else. And then all the details of what they actually hope to build has got to be engineered and all that and actually constructed. So this is not happening near term. I just want to make sure everybody understands that. And I do want to say to New Jersey Transit, as I've said, every time you guys have indulged me with a meeting over the last year, the MOU and the phrase about heavy rail and what happens if heavy rail disappears from that right of way. That is a major concern of mine, continues to be a major concern of mine, and I want to make sure we address it. So not tonight, but just I want to keep it on the top of the list. Thank you.
And so, Louise, could you just wait? Would you mind holding it? There's one member of the public who would very much like to speak. Could you bring Adam? Could you bring Virginia Kerr over? I know Virginia has some legal questions, a few legal questions, and she's someone who has a long history of involvement in this.
Okay, she should be on her way over.
Virginia, I do not see.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, as long as you can hear me. And no, I don't have a legal comments in particular. Okay. I'll try to be fast. I wanted to just make a comment about the survey because I and many others took this survey, and I don't think we were told that option 4, which was no build, was essentially a placekeeper. I think we thought that was a serious option, and it's troublesome now to hear that from the point of view of the architects of the study, it wasn't really a meaningful option, because I think we saw it as a meaningful option. And related to the no build is another comment I'd like to make. And I understand the equipment on the dinky is aging and not necessarily consistent with new equipment that's being placed on the main line. But all of us, or many of us, know that there is other equipment out there in the wings that is battery operated, sustainable, and will work on heavy rail. And I guess I would say it would have been nice had the study acknowledged that possibility. My second question, or my second comment, is just about the proposal to run a BRT through Princeton. And I really agree that it would be great to provide this kind of mobility throughout town. But I guess I'm asking why we can't do that with buses already. And I'm also just thinking about the mental calculation that people make who live in Princeton, who have to catch a 7:30 train or an 8 o'clock train that goes into New York, and they're living near the shopping center. And are they going to get on a bus or a BRT that's going through Princeton with the traffic that many of us experience now, and take a chance that they'll get there? So, I mean, I just don't know what kinds of consumer behavior studies have been done about this, or what kind of traffic studies in Princeton have played into this proposal. And I guess my third question is just a question. I know that the ride to the junction on the dinky is 5 minutes now, and I'm just wondering whether the light rail would be 5 minutes, whether the BRT would be 5 minutes. I know someone said it would be about the same, but there's a big difference between 7 minutes and 5 minutes when you're trying to catch a train. And I'll just end with a comment that I am kind of sympathetic with those people who've spoken who say they don't understand why we would do both light rail and a BRT on the same line, but I'd like to know the answer to the time, please.
This is Lou. There's a lot there. You presented us with a lot of information. I want to get to the most important point to us, which is to understand that alternative 4, no build, is not considered a less serious option. In a conceptual study, you compare what is with what could be, and then all the options, including no build, stand on their own. and we get input, we develop technical information, we get feedback from stakeholders, we get feedback from riders and the public, and they all go into the equation. There is nothing dismissive about no build. It's important to understand that. In terms of the travel times, we don't have vehicles yet. This isn't a vehicle study, other than understanding what the different modes would be. We believe that the travel times will be similar, very similar. And also we're talking about a higher frequency of service connecting with the Northeast Corridor, which has a pretty high frequency of service too. We will be able to develop more detailed information as time goes on. But again, this is a high level conceptual study about what can be done with the right of way. What can we do to meet people's needs? What can we do to grow ridership, extend the reach of transit, provide a more frequent service, provide service that is more environmentally friendly, that does not emit. And that's what this was about. We are, I can go on, but it is late, but I wanted to leave it at that.
And if I could just jump in with Lou's comment, I apologize if it seemed like I was dismissing the no build. My qualification of saying it's required as part of, and that's why it's being carried, was just explaining why we're carrying alternative 4 through the process, even though the overall scoring and the alternatives analysis was fairly low. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, Louise.
Thank you. I'm going to hone my 10 comments down to 2 or 3. First of all, I hear a groundswell for doing away with the light rail and just sticking with rubber tires. And I want to weigh in for redundancy. I'm a fan of having both. Excuse me. And I also feel like the no build scenario, from my perspective, is highly undesirable. I think it's just so important that we have the bike ped connection parallel. I think the bike parking at the station needs to be covered parking, if at all possible. And apropos of what the mayor's reality check, which I very much respect, I just think that's all the more reason for us to just push and push and push and push, even if we do, understand that this is years away. It's just so important not to let up and not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Thanks. Great session. Thank you, New Jersey Transit. It's just very exciting, all this.
Thanks, Louise. Okay, there are no hands, so and that was a really nice ending. And Mark, did you have anything else you wanted to close with? No. Okay. So thanks, New Jersey Transit. Thank you everyone so much for coming. And obviously this is just the beginning. This is a very long journey, but I think the Transit Committee wanted to invite you all to engage with us as we start on this process of engaging with New Jersey Transit. And my dogs are going to start responding. I don't know whose dog that is, but anyway, I think if there are questions tonight that didn't get asked, if you want to funnel them to me, and we'll try to get them answered by New Jersey Transit, or discuss them in the Transit Committee and get back to you. Okay. Thank you. Have a great night.
Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mia.
Okay. Bye-bye.